Thanks for staying with us on The Real Story. Connecticut's capital city is dealing with an increase in violence. Right now, there have been 11 homicides in Hartford. That's double the amount from this time last year. And we really must keep in mind that those aren't just statistics and numbers. There are people behind those numbers. We know one of those homicides was an innocent life here. 62-year-old Cynthia Reynolds was out tending to her garden in the middle of the day in March. She worked 2 nursing jobs and was a grandmother, raking outside of her home on Irving Street. But a bullet shot from a car nearby struck her, and several days later, she died from her injuries. Her homicide is an open investigation. It's certainly heartbreaking and scary for anyone who hears what happened to Cynthia Reynolds, but of course, for the good, hardworking people who live on that street and in the city, it's very unnerving. Late last week, people living on Irving Street met with the mayor, police, as well as our next guest, Pastor A.J. Johnson, a community organizer and faith leader, to figure out a game plan as we head into what could be a violent summer. What ideas are out there to stem the tide and make change? Pastor Johnson leads the Urban Hope Refuge Church. He joins us once again on The Real Story to tell us how it went and what efforts are underway to make Hartford safer. Good morning to you. Thanks for coming back on The Real Story.
Good morning, Jen, and thank you so much for having me back on this show. And to all your viewers and all the fans that watch you, you do a phenomenal job reporting on The Real Story in Connecticut. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Pastor Johnson. We certainly want to discuss what's going on in your community. So tell me, I mean, this meeting is in a broader context for what can be done to try to curb violence, especially ahead of the summer. But just give us a little bit about how that meeting went. I mean, we had Irving Street residents coming together and contacting you, right, wanting to figure out a solution here.
Right. So, one, I want to shout out the residents of Irving Street, Keisha, Precious, Ross, all of the residents there, Monica, who are homeowners that own their properties on Irving Street, and they've been there for over 30 years. They're a group of folks who came into the community, brought one property, then got family members to come over and buy properties, and they practically own the whole street along with the folks that rent their units from them. So these people are homeowners. They're truly invested in the city of Hartford, which I believe most people are invested in the city, and just are fed up with the gun violence and the shooting that's happening in our city. And so they decided to organize around their conditions, and have been in communication with the police and the mayor to come up with solutions regarding their neighborhood that they love so much and have invested in. And so right now, those that are invested in the city of Hartford have to come together and let your voices be heard. Violence is something that should not be accepted. We know that it does happen, and we know the community that we live in. But it's time at this point for all of us to organize and come together so we can curb this violence.
Yeah, I know that those discussions are ongoing, and I know that you had said, there were some tangible solutions that were discussed. But one thing that you had said to me when we were talking about that meeting was that you noticed that, like, being organized, having a message was the best way to try to bring about some change. Is that a blueprint, do you think, for maybe other areas, Hartford, even other cities to look at?
Yeah, absolutely. As a organizer, one thing that I have realized, and as just a community leader, one thing that I have realized is that when you have conversations about things that affect people, it's better not to have those conversations by yourself. And so organizing is a tool of bringing people together, being in relationship with one another, and coming to a consensus of, this is what we want for our community. So it's not just Hartford. It could be Bridgeport. It could be New Haven. All of us in our various towns need to organize. Going to the mayor or the police chief or the governor of any town or state by yourself may not get the job done. But if our voices are collected, we know in this country power comes in 2 forms: organized money and organized people. That's how you have power, and that's how you get the attention to make sure that the issues that are affecting you are worked on. So not only do I applaud the Irvin Street residents for stepping up and saying that they want to curb this violence, they're seeing a trend, but I want to encourage other communities to come together and unify your voice to approach our political figures, to approach people in power, and let them know your agenda for what you want in your community. That's just not a North Hartford thing. That's a South Hartford thing. That's a West Hartford thing. That's an Avon, Farmington, and Simsbury thing as well.
Is there a level of accountability that needs to happen with the crime out there? I mean, you know, obviously we have people who we see are repeat offenders. So how do you handle, it's a complex issue though, right? And we know that there's a lot of juvenile crime out there as well. What's your take on navigating such a complex problem?
Well, I want to put it to you like this. The Connecticut Against Gun Violence, CAGV, has the statistic out. 56% of the state's gun homicide victims are Black. 5 times the proportion who live here. Young Black men are profoundly vulnerable, killed by guns at 39 times the rate of young white men. And I bring that statistic up because it is important that we understand that gun violence in our urban cities has a lot to do with racism and poverty. And we cannot overlook or understate the fact that a lot of our communities where Black and brown young men are, a lot of them are fighting to find jobs. A lot of them are fighting to find identity. A lot of them are fighting poverty. A lot of them, before they walk out the door, have to deal with an unusual amount of circumstances. And you really have to be in a bad place, in a bad mental state, to take someone's life with a gun. And so it is, what we have to understand is that gun violence just doesn't affect Hartford. I know we want to sit in our comfortable suburban towns with our high luxury, high-end stores and be happy every weekend. But 5 miles down the road, 10 miles down the road, there is a community suffering with violence. There's a community suffering in poverty. And if we're going to fix this, it's not just going to be a Black issue. It's not just going to be a white issue. It has to be an everyone issue where we all come together and figure out how do we equally disperse funds so everyone is taken care of? How do we raise a minimum wage? How do we provide opportunities for young people of color in the state of Connecticut? And what we also have to realize and understand is that when young people go out and commit these crimes, you can't punish every young person, every person of color, for a small group of young people committing these crimes. I know it's easy to do, to profile and say all young people of color that are that are walking around with hoodies on with Skittles and iced teas are the ones committing the crimes, but we really have to understand that that is in the spirit of racism. You can't identify one group of people. And so when we say in our state that cars are being jacked and we're putting our suburban towns on notice that they need to protect themselves and we need to create laws, these laws are harmful to young people that live and do well. And some young people some young people of color live in suburban towns, right? They live there and they are uncomfortable. So imagine if we created laws that harmfully affected young people of color for a small group, a small population of young folks that have maybe made the wrong turn in life.
Do you feel like the amount of, I mean, I know you're going to say, no, we could use more programs, but the amount of programs in Hartford, are you seeing gaps of where, you know, state funding could go to help on this end or this end for youth programs? Where's the gap there?
Well, so I don't think there is a gap in programs per se, but I want you to understand what gun violence costs Connecticut. Gun violence costs Connecticut an estimated $1.2 billion every year. of that measurable hard cost of $430 million, of which at least $90 million is paid by the taxpayer each year, right? And so what we have to understand is that gun violence costs everybody. And when we think of the programs that young people have, there's great programs in Connecticut or in Hartford. We have the Y, we have Hartford Proud, we have all kind of nonprofits. But I think where the issue is how do we reach the young people who don't want to be reached, right? I think that is the question. We're reaching young people, we're reaching and we're saving lives every day. But I think the real question is, how do we reach those young people that fall under the crack that we can't identify every day?
Pastor Johnson, it's a very good point, and that definitely makes you think. And I think it will have our audience members thinking as well. We have run out of time, though. Thank you so much for coming on The Real Story and updating us, and please keep reaching out so we can continue this discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you for having the conversation.
Of course. All right, that does it for us on The Real Story. If you want to watch these segments again, head to fox61.com. Have a good morning.